Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Orange Slice, where we talk about web design and digital marketing. This will be our last podcast of 2020,
But not ever.
but not ever, of 2020, which has been one heck of a year. Dave, you've been in the trenches. You've been working hard. Can you tell me a little bit about what you've had to deal with?
Working hard from home.
Working hard from home. How's that been? Don't you have kids and stuff?
Well, with kids, it makes it a little difficult.
You don't have little office helpers?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't call them that. I'd call them office hellions during that time period. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. The people that have had to work from home. It's been real.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
and during this time, it seems like smaller, mid-sized businesses haven't been necessarily quiet. So you've had a lot to do, and your staff has been busy.
well, I think everybody's had a lot to adapt to.
Right.
Just adapting to the changes. I mean, obviously, being part of the team, you've seen what we've had to do during the time, and that was one of the reasons too why we wanted to jump in to the video today, and kind of address something that nobody really knows, like how long we're going to be locked down for, or not even locked down, just restricted. Because even if some businesses aren't locked down, others are going to be. Or if we work with out-of-state clients, they have different restrictions. And one of the things that we've encountered a lot more, particularly this year than in other years, has been RFPs,
Which is
requests for proposal, RFP. So we're going to put up a little box. This is something new we're going to do with our videos. We're going to put up an overlay, so it'll show the description. So right now, RFP, request for proposal. So request for proposal is essentially a document that is created by a company that they send off to a smaller or larger number of agencies in order to get a quote.
doesn't necessarily have to be a web company.
No,
An
it
RFP
can be for
could be
anything.
building a shed.
Yeah,
Or
and
whatever.
today specifically, we are going to talk about web and internet marketing companies or development companies. So today we want to talk about our opinions on the 7 reasons why an RFP is a complete waste of time.
A waste of time. But RFPs have been happening and going on for decades, if not centuries.
And they've had the same problem pretty much the entire time. Yeah.
So what would you say the usual intake is of one of these? Like how would an RFP come across your desk?
So an RFP is generally created by a lower or mid-level project manager at a company, someone who is usually like moderately involved in a project or very lightly. They are aware of the project's needs. Again, sometimes lightly, sometimes moderately. It just really depends upon how involved they are in the project.
Can we have an example project so that we can keep something in
Sure.
mind?
So an example would be, let's say you're at a small to medium-sized business, but you have a franchise. And I say smaller, medium, $10 million company, right?
Okay.
Revenue. So $10 million company, and you're creating this new widget or this new application or this new CRM or some type of software or some type of system. You need something developed and potentially marketed, and you're wanting to know what the process is for that.
Okay.
Right? So you as that person at that team or in charge of that project would get information from your team as to, here's the specifics, here's the timeline, here's what we know or what we think we need or what we want right now. Sometimes you see a number assigned with that, sometimes you don't. It really just depends upon the project and the company. Generally speaking, larger companies have to have a number for their internal guidelines.
For like managing marketing budgets and stuff like
no,
that?
well, yes to some of that, but also for like policies. So like government policies and things like that. You will see some of that. Again, it really just depends. So that's that part.
So whatever you get an RFP, what's the first thing you do? Do you just say, oh yeah, we'll respond to you in 2 weeks? Or
usually there's a timeline that's given in the RFP for a response date. So they'll say, here's an example. They'll say, here's our RFP. We've considered you for our project. The guidelines are outlined in the attachment. I'll be your contact person, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So we look at the proposal. We see what it involves. Usually they'll have it broken down. And again, I'm generalizing for a lot of these things. Every RFP is going to be slightly different. Based upon the company, the needs of the project, et cetera. But generally what you're going to see is, here's what we're trying to do in a nutshell, right? We're trying to make this thing that does X, Y, Z, and sometimes stay within this certain type of budget. Here's your contact person. Here's how much time. here's the dates. More established companies will be like, here's the dates when we're doing like open questions. Some people will do those via Zoom calls. I personally find those the most difficult because you have multiple agencies kind of clamoring for the same answers, right? It's really difficult to do one of those that I don't think the relationship building is quite as good.
Yeah,
but then you'll have a deliverable date for all your responses.
I'm glad you brought up Zoom, and then there's Google Meets, there's Skype, there's all these other remote.
Again, based upon what Microsoft meetings.
Yeah, there's 100 of them.
Right.
Has that been a challenge for you lately, or have you adapted to it?
No, I don't really think it's different. I don't think that. I think that you miss out on information when you're not in person, right? So if you've ever dealt in sales, if you've ever dealt in discussing projects, you can accomplish the same thing, but I feel like you're missing that little extra bit, right? Because I don't feel like humans were meant to communicate behind a screen. They were meant, whether you say we're divine or we're animals or whatever, we're meant to communicate for the most part in person. Now, we've made substantial advancements with that, but communication happens, in my opinion, and in my experience, the best when you're able to read the situation. Because when you're missing out on something, think about like with masks, to go off on a tangent for a second, since we're talking about 2020 being the year of COVID, right? I think that if we're talking about Zoom, that's one layer of difficulty or adjustment that's needed. But also when you have a mask, if you're in a meeting, and if I'm talking to you and this half of my face is covered up, look how much information you're not getting.
I have no idea if you're smiling or frowning.
All the information you're getting is literally from my eyes, right? Which is difficult. So again, the RFPs, in my opinion, and a lot of the people's opinions that I've talked to about it, are a complete waste of time. And that's what we wanted to talk about, was our basic, there's a lot of reasons why they can be called that, but basically distilling it down to 7 reasons exactly.
Right. We'll get to that in just a moment. I did want to ask one thing. I've noticed an odd trend throughout the year where remote conferencing and meetings has almost gotten more of a cluster F word than it was early on. And I think it's because people think they know what they're doing and have gotten used to it.
Well, I think that without knowing people's technical difficulties,
right.
I think the biggest challenge is, that trying to operate higher end equipment is more challenging. And if you have a separate mic, a separate video camera, particularly like a higher end camera, and you've never had to do this before, and now XYZ person in XYZ marketing department now has to conduct the majority of their meetings through video. I think, again, I just think it comes back to challenges. I think it's just different.
Gotcha. So I did want to continue on our original discussion, of course, before we got on a tangent.
There goes 5 minutes.
Yeah, there goes 5 minutes. Sorry, guys. What would some of the benefits of an RFP provide people?
I think you get different takes on what you're trying to do.
If I said I want to build XYZ app,
right,
and I sent out an RFP to 3 app developers,
one of the major benefits would be you get different takes, right? Because let's use something more simplistic than an application. Let's use something like WordPress. So if I say I'm going to build a WordPress site for Joe's Plumbing Company, right? Or let's say I'm a Fortune 500 company. I have this massive thing. I want to build it in a certain type of platform.
You don't want to do it internally, obviously.
Correct. That's usually the reason for RFP. Or you have your own thing, and this isn't your own, something your own team can handle or is not proficient in, right? Usually, a lot of people can handle marketing internally up to a certain degree, much more so if you have an internal marketing department, right? But they're not going to be skilled in development. They're not going to be skilled in IT or server management or cloud server management, things like that, right? That's more specific. So an RFP is generally used for that purpose. And back to your point, one of the benefits of those is that you do get multiple opinions, and generally considered they're from agency experts, or industry experts, I should say, because they involve, at that agency, they're going to involve more than one person. You're going to have more than one person at more than one agency giving you lots of different responses. How do we all accomplish A to Z differently? And timelines and cost, if that's as a requirement of the RFP, which generally speaking they will be.
Is there a bureaucratic benefit to doing it? Like if my cousin Ned is a web agency, needs to build me something, do you think I would have to justify using Ned because I could weigh him against other people?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. What I've seen in a lot of RFPs is that they already have someone that's pre-selected or that they favor for the project.
And then so the boss needs to see the options.
Well, the boss usually isn't involved in the RFP. They'll make so people misunderstand business hierarchies in a lot of different ways. Generally speaking, if the boss is involved, at a medium or higher level company in an RFP creation, then they're probably not doing something necessarily all the way right. That's not the best use of the CEO or a higher level executive at that company's talents, right? And you'll have people that are more invested and involved in particular parts of that project more so than the CEO or a higher level project manager would be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it's just not the best use of their time. So when they're sending these out, they already have somebody in mind.
Right.
And what they're doing, it's either a company policy thing or the boss says, okay, that sounds good from the company that we favor or want to go to or normally go to, but I want to get a second take on it for industry reasons, for company policy reasons. The quote's too high, the quote's too low, it looks fishy. There's some reason why they want to send it out and vet against this other person.
Right. It's like if you get cancer, you want a second opinion.
Correct. I would hope so. Or in this case, with all the testing COVID, I mean, you never know.
Absolutely.
Some people say one's positive, one's negative. You never really know. But so there's disadvantages. So one of the reasons that's going to be a waste of time is that if you've already got somebody pre-selected or favored for a project, and you're doing it for company policy reasons, you're just wanting to fire it off to multiple other agencies. First of all, there's the time in creating the RFP. Generally speaking, it's not going to be one person. Generally speaking, it's not going to be one page. Generally speaking, it's going to be very specific. Well, maybe that's a contradiction there.
So let's start here. If I'm John in HR and I was told to make an RFP for my mid-sized company, that doesn't mean I know everything that needs to be in it.
That's true, and that's why I say there's a lot of time invested in that. So an
RFP, that company itself might not know what's involved. So
the one that make it, well, we'll get to that later.
Okay.
Yeah, that's another point that I'm going to talk about in just a little while. But the biggest thing that I would say that's number one on our list is that you're going to potentially exclude or rule out, an agency or a group of talented people that should otherwise be considered for the project because you have a favor, right? Waste of time. Also, we talked about like the agency or the company that's making it, right? But also the company that's receiving it. So if you already have a favor, or a company or agency that's favored for a project, let's say it takes you, and this is light, let's say it takes 10 to 15 hours to discuss with all the project leaders what's needed for this specific thing, what our budgets are for it, how long it's going to take, all the moving parts, et cetera. Again, that's low. Realistically, you're talking 20 to 40 hours, right, to make that. Now, I have to find the agencies. I have to send it out. I have to find the emails. Okay, so now I've got another little bit of time. Now I fire it off to all these agencies. Now these agencies have to look at this and quote it per the RFP, right? That's why it's called a request for proposal.
So then you have 3 of the same meetings in a row.
Potentially, and also you're reviewing a lot of different proposals. So your total time, and let's just use an example. Let's say it's for a lower budget project. A lower budget for an RFP would probably be like 40 to 60K, right? You're going to burn through potentially thousands of dollars worth of labor just getting to the part where you can get to that, right? You're taking significant percentages of your overall budget, and these agencies, you've paid your people and your team to put together the RFP. Now all these agencies have to spend, let's call it, I mean, we've been through this multiple times. Let's say 8 to 15 hours on average, and what I find troubling about the RFPs is a lot of times they don't involve discovery time. So you're saying, I want all this stuff, and a lot of it might be really complex, right? Not hard, just complex, like different things you need to figure out, okay, so you want to use this with this. Well, what if those aren't compatible?
But isn't that just business? Because if my car breaks down and I take it to the shop and ask for a quote, that's just kind of expected.
Have you ever gone to the shop and then they fixed it and they charged you for it and it didn't fix your problem? Do you see what I mean? And that leads me to my second point of why I feel like it's a waste of time is that, the people a lot of the times are saying, this is what I want.
Right.
This is what I want. But what you want might not be what you need.
Can you give me a random example?
Sure. So I've got this one thing I'm trying to make compatible with this other thing, and this needs to talk to that. I know this is generic, but this is common.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I need to have this thing that's on Google Cloud talk to this thing that's on AWS, which is Amazon Web Services, which also needs to spit out this node thing and export this CSV. It's like, well, wait a minute.
That's not.
Is that the most efficient way to do that? Right? Just because you already have these things in place, or maybe it's a Microsoft server, and it's like, oh, that's a whole different world, right? There's so much going on there that's like, well, wait a minute, why wouldn't you just build it all inside of one and make that work more streamlined?
Right.
So you'd have decreased latency, you'd have better reliability, you'd have less of a maintenance cost because it's all inside of one platform. So, again, that's one of the reasons why I don't think that RFPs, the second reason in this video today, I don't think that everybody really knows what they need. They know what they want to do, and that's where the conversation should lead. And you should better spend your time versus creating these pages of all this stuff that everybody's got to review and you're going to blast it out. And just say, hey, here's the thing I'm trying to do in a paragraph. Fire that paragraph off to a couple people that you've already vetted and you think are a good fit for your project based upon the way they present themselves, their past work, their customer reviews, right? What style and what type and what scope of clients they work with, right? Because if they're, you mentioned the Joe's Plumber, we always use some generic reference. But, Joe's Plumber, if they've worked on a bunch of Joe's Plumber sites and you're frickin' PepsiCo,
right.
That's not a good fit. You know what I mean? You have to look for people that are the same type of industry and scope as you.
It definitely sounds like commissioning a piece of art where you tell them generically what you want and then you let the artist decide what that looks like.
Sure. Well, there's that part of it too. And we were talking about numbers too. Remember in point one we said, sometimes they'll send over a number and sometimes they won't. That leads also into my third thing is that, when you're sending a request for proposal, specifically there's not discovery and paid discovery time. I mean, no agency wants to spend 20 hours worth of work for free. Right. Everybody's got to eat. Everybody's got to pay employees. So what I've seen, and we don't practice it here. Generally speaking, we'll turn down an RFP if there's not any type of discovery time allowed, just because I can't give you an accurate number. So. Point number 3 being it's a waste of time. The numbers that you receive will likely not be exact or hardcore accurate, right? So you're going to look at this and say, all right, well, you're not paying me to do this, so I have to create this answer for you in the most minimal amount of time possible so that I'm not extended, right? And most of the time, we'll spend, an hour or two with people just to figure it out, maybe a couple hours depending upon the scope of the project because we want to give an accurate answer. But, if I am like, let's use my GCP or Google Cloud to AWS to Node and CSV exports, and right, exactly, your face says, oh, like what the hell is that, right? That's complex. I cannot give you an accurate answer without logging into your system, seeing how it's set up, talking with your developers, seeing all these different points and figuring out all that info. And the same can be said for more complex, even just web development projects, right? So if I'm quoting out a website, you're completely redesigning everything. You've got thousands of blog posts and we have to export all these different things. An
e-com store, whatever.
An e-com store would be a great example. If you're changing from Magento to BigCommerce or something of that nature, that's a big deal. Doesn't mean it's something we can't do. Doesn't mean it's something that's extremely complex, but there's steps involved that will make that have specific requirements, and those requirements are going to take time. If I can't accurately quote out the time, then whatever number I give you is going to be pointless.
Do you think that there's some sort of stigma attached to RFPs whenever you see one come across your desk? Like because of what you mentioned earlier about they probably already have a vendor that they have in mind?
Well, I think so. It's just kind of like I'm thinking about this because I want to phrase it the right way. An RFP generally doesn't show a genuine business relationship interest. It is, I have this thing that I need done. I don't care really who does it. I'm just kind of looking for, and again, I'm speaking generally, of course. I'm looking for the best answer for this, which is a good thing.
Sometimes you got to get
which is a
shit
good
done.
thing.
Yeah.
You got to get, hey, I don't have time to have all these conversations, but you really should, especially on the ones that are more complex, because a lot of the answers that you're wanting in your RFP can be had on a 20-minute phone call. And those 20-minute phone calls you're going to have on that RFP anyway. Do you know what I'm saying? So if I have a problem, let's go back to Joe's Plumbing. And Steve's plumbing and Tom's plumbing. Problem with we're oversimplifying, of course.
Or Sarah's
for the sake,
plumbing.
thank you. Let's keep it correct. We'll keep it PC. So if I spend 5 minutes on the phone with all of them, let's say Tom picks up the phone, Tom's plumbing. Oh no, right? So he's presenting himself poorly, and you'll know pretty quick, right? Hey, I have this thing. Well, I don't know. I have to take a look at it, right? Whereas, Steve's plumbing or Sally's plumbing, they pick up, hey, Sally's plumbing, how can I help you? Okay, yeah, it sounds like something that we've definitely fixed before. What's going on? Okay, this and that. Okay, well, cool. Let me check the calendar. I have somebody I can get out with you. X, Y, Z. It sounds like they've done it before. They know what they're talking about. It shows you've already kind of developed the relationship. First, you've established, I like talking to this person. They're personable, and they sound like they know what they're doing. So then you're going to vet them a little bit further. Eventually, they're going to fix your problem, right?
I think what you're kind of dancing around here, to go back to our topic of why RFPs kind of suck,
are a waste of time.
Or a waste of time.
Which it can be said it's the same thing.
Is that, say, if you were on the client side, you would have to have the same meeting 10 times and coordinate all that stuff, and you're just burning hours setting up Zoom calls, setting up...
Well, I don't think you have to do it 10 times.
But the reason I say that is because the person who's usually in charge of the RFP, quote, from you, might not know all the technical stuff. They might just have a document.
So that brings me into my next point and why I think that RFPs are a waste of time. Again, generally speaking...
They're not shot callers.
Not even shot callers. That's irrelevant. I mean, first of all, well, I don't want to say it's irrelevant. Not having a shot caller involved in an RFP does have its disadvantages. It also has advantages based upon how their time is utilized. But let's go back to what you were saying. So you were saying that, and you were repeating what I said, essentially, that
it's a drag on everybody.
It's a drag on everybody, but here's the biggest problem about that specifically is that we talked about light or moderately involved people being involved in the RFP. Well, that's a problem. If you don't know how your thing needs to function, or you've just been handed it down, if I told you a story that was 2 pages long, okay, here's what I need to do, it's this thing, especially if you're not an expert in that, you don't understand what I'm talking about, even if you are, wouldn't it be hard to reiterate that to somebody else?
Yeah.
So let's take this incredibly complex thing, hand it to somebody who's moderately or minorly involved in the project, doesn't exactly understand its needs, have them create this proposal, and then try to pass it off to somebody else and have them accurately quote it without having any discovery time available.
Right, it's just going to backfire.
It's going to backfire, and there's significant challenges in that. So, if we wanted to recap a bit, first of all, if you've already got somebody in mind, you're going to potentially block out a lot of qualified talent, right? You're going to have this preconceived notion that this person is the best, and these people were just doing this for company policy or just to get a general idea. But you're wasting your time in creating the RFP, and also the people's time that's going to be reviewing it. And also, if let's say your preferred vendor fails, you're going to go back to all those other people and then want them to do something for you.
And they're going to have
a preconceived notion of their own, like, well, you kind of had to spend like 15, 20 hours and nothing happened. And again, we're speaking in generalities, and some of these things are going to be rare, but generally speaking, with an RFP, that's what I've seen happen. So to recap point 1. So let's talk about point 2. You probably don't know, what you want, but you don't know exactly what you need, right? Ties in with problem 1. You don't have, you're going to block out a lot of people who are qualified. Our last point of, all these different people who are involved in this thing who aren't really involved at the level they need to be. Well, now we know we want this thing, but we don't know what we need. I'm going to say what I want to happen, but I don't know exactly what I need to happen. I don't know that probably having all these different cloud platforms talking to each other is a bad thing. And what you're probably doing is grandfathering in all this stuff that you don't really need anymore, where it could be reinvented and streamlined properly. That's where you need to be more open-minded in regards to that.
Could you give us a piece of advice for businesses that might be small to mid-level that might consider the RFP route and what they should do instead?
Yes. So what I think you should do is have a streamlined document that is very specific and also very short. Here's the main things we're trying to accomplish. Here's what we're currently using. How would you approach that? Okay. And vet your agencies beforehand. Say, these are the people I feel who are a good fit. So here's where I understand this.
Don't just expect a a quote sent back to you. Expect a meeting.
Yeah,
or
I mean, we've done that and it's been successful, but it's not as fluid. It's generally not the best solution because a lot of the parameters have been predefined by the product owner.
right. And this might sound sissy from my perspective, but you don't develop a relationship if you just say, "Oh, you want that? Here you go."
Yeah, because anybody at that point, you're just the McDonald's of developers.
Yeah.
You know, it's like I go there, they gave me this, okay, I got lunch, but it wasn't an experience. You don't want to go back, and also, you know, people aren't going to admire that experience either. You know, if you go to Ruth's Chris, it's a lot different experience than McDonald's.
Well, I mean, there's an argument to be made that
And there's also arguments to be made on price. I get that, but again, you know, it really depends upon what you're going for. But at the same time, if you're looking
shout
for
out to Ruth's Chris. Thanks for staying safe during the COVID year.
By the way, they do not sponsor this video in any way, shape, or form.
They,
but if they want to,
they can follow this link to send
exactly.
us an email, and we can go from there.
Right. So again, you know, that's one of the big things about it is you just have significant challenges that we're going to recap on the screen right now. You know, here's a couple of points where we feel that RFPs are a complete waste of time.
Except if you're like Boeing, that's a different thing. If I was a weapon manufacturer
yes,
and I needed Lockheed Martin,
but also at the same time when you're talking about things like that,
that's way different ballgame.
It's a way different ballgame, but they already know that what they're asking for is going to take a lot of time, and they're going to have a budget preset and already approved for discovery time.
Years in advance.
Potentially, but they're going to account for that.
Right.
They're not going to say we want to have this $200,000 or $500,000 thing that needs to be created and expect someone to be able to quote that without spending 40, 50, 60, 100 hours. Here's the exact path on every single thing that you want to happen, and they're not going to expect that for free.
Right.
Because their time is money, our time is money, and I think that, you know, in business, the way that both businesses benefit is when it's mutual.
Thanks again, everybody, for listening to our final podcast of 2020. This is Orange Slice, David and Brennan, where we discussed a couple reasons why RFPs are usually not the right thing to do.
Otherwise known as a complete waste of time. However, if you have a very well-organized RFP and you'd like to send us one, we'd be more than happy to take a look at it, providing everything is fair and that you understand all the talking points that we talked about today.
I would, you know, if I got an RFP in the email right now, I want it to look like a resume almost. 1 or 2 pages, bullet points, nice and simple and tight.
Here's a phone call and let's get started.
Yeah, let's do it. All right, have a good one, guys, and Happy New Year's.
Why are you moving around at the end? You're getting all jittery.
Because people move around.
It's your fucking Red Bull crack.
I only had 2 today.
That's a lot.